Hello, this is Sonia with the Sci-fi Adventures Channel, and I'm happy to be back with more of my story time tracks. We're going to be starting chapter 10, and I did break up this chapter into a part 1 and part 2, so this will be part 1, and I've titled chapter 10, The Mysterious Appearance of Dr. Frederick Eisenhart. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll just get started with part 1. Sophia had been so focused on Daniel that it took several minutes for her to finally notice that there was, sitting 2 rows up in front of her, a 4th passenger now in the train with them. Daniel, who was still absorbed in his own thoughts, seemed to have taken no notice of the new passenger at all, and when Sophia looked at Spencer, she saw that he too appeared to be unaware. For a moment she was not quite sure how to proceed, until finally she decided it best to simply study the new arrival as discreetly as possible. The longer she observed him, it occurred to her that it had taken so long to notice him, not only because she had been distracted, but because he had the distinct air of someone who did not want to be noticed. He was sitting stiffly in his seat, and he had a plain brown briefcase next to him on the floor that protruded slightly out into the aisle. He was nearly bald and small in stature, and he had on a pair of wiry spectacles that Sophia thought made him look quite studious. He wore a simple brown suit and plain Oxford flat dress shoes to match. As Sophia continued to study him, she thought he looked quite uncomfortable and felt a pang of compassion for him. She found herself wondering what could have caused the air of melancholy that clearly hung all about him. It was this sadness she sensed in him that helped her decide that the humane thing to do would be to simply introduce herself and act as though his appearance on the train was an ordinary and even matter-of-fact occurrence. Having made up her mind, she nudged Daniel and pointed to the man. Daniel looked at the new passenger in surprise, but said nothing as Sophia put her finger to her lips. At that very same moment, Spencer conveniently came out of his own reverie and turned towards Sophia. As he did so, his eyes widened as they rested fully on the peculiar new passenger, and Sophia put her finger to her lips once again. Fortunately, Spencer also caught her meaning, and like Daniel, waited quietly for her to speak to the man. Working up her courage, she cleared her throat politely, hoping to get his attention. "Hello there, sir. I am Sophia, and this is Daniel and Spencer, and we only just noticed you here a few minutes ago and wanted to introduce ourselves." At her greeting, the man turned sideways in his seat and peered intently at all 3 of them before responding in a surprisingly high-pitched and energetic tone. "Well, I suppose you might as well know who I am, seeing as we will be traveling together here on the train. I have the misfortune of being the renowned scientist, Dr. Frederick Eisenhart." Sophia's eyes widened with immediate interest. "You are a scientist? That must be so interesting. But may I ask why you say it is a misfortune?" The man gazed at Sophia with a candid and pained expression. "Yes, indeed, you may ask, young lady, but I warn you it is a sad tale, and not for the faint of heart." As Sophia caught her breath and considered his words of caution, Daniel spoke up. "I can definitely relate to that. I have a tale of misfortune myself, and it has led me here." The man looked even more pained after hearing Daniel's declaration, and he shook his head sadly. "You might find this hard to believe, but I suspect that whatever unfortunate course of events transpired to bring you here aboard this train, they can most likely be directly traced back to me." Daniel, Sophia, and Spencer all gasped out loud at the man's distressing confession, and all three of them were now regarding their new traveling companion with wide-eyed surprise and rapt attention. For a moment, Sophia felt as though the very air inside the passenger car had become electric as they waited in breathless anticipation for the scientist to continue. His brow furrowed deeply with concentration as he launched into his explanation for being on the train. You see, I was able to successfully break down Shor's algorithm. Clearing his throat nervously, he continued, and I will forever regret it. Pride got the best of me, and I unwittingly and foolishly fed information to the leader of the rebels. The scientist was clearly shaken as he peered at them pleadingly as though he were asking for forgiveness. Sophia felt another pang of compassion for him and wanted very much to reassure him that everything would somehow be okay. Daniel, however, said nothing and now had a slight frown on his face, while Spencer, who had not yet spoken since the new passenger's arrival, sprang excitedly up out of his seat and rushed over to sit down right next to their new traveling companion. Just when I thought my mind could not be more blown, what in the world is Shor's algorithm, and who are the rebels? A bit taken aback by Spencer's relocation, the scientist stared at Spencer with such a look of surprise on his face that Sophia wondered anxiously if he might have offended the man. Whether the scientist was surprised or offended, he seemed to regain his composure quickly enough as he proceeded to answer Spencer's questions. I will try as best I can to break it down in layman's terms. You see, Shor's algorithm uses quantum mechanics to find prime numbers and break encryption. Spencer shook his head, clearly confused. What does encryption have to do with these rebels you were talking about? The scientist let out a heavy sigh and adjusted his spectacles before answering. This algorithm is for quantum computers, and I stumbled upon a certain set of prime numbers. It really was quite accidental, I assure you. But when I did so, I foolishly answered a message that had been sent out into the multiverse that was most unfortunately detected and responded to by the one that the time conductor refers to here on this timeline as the Time Bandit. So you see, it is my fault that the Time Bandit has hijacked this timeline. I foolishly answered his hail, with no thought that he might have meant us harm. The scientist caught his breath then, and having gone quite pale, he sank back into his seat and was silent. Sophia was glad he did not say more, at least in that moment, because her head had suddenly started to hurt terribly. Suddenly there appeared in her mind's eye something akin to a movie screen, with images flashing by so quickly they made her head spin. Clutching her head in alarm and frightfully dizzy now, she cried out for help, and at the sound of her cry, Daniel and Spencer jumped up in unison. Sophia wondered vaguely if the train had started moving in the direction of the time portal already, and it had somehow badly affected her. But this was only a fleeting thought, as she was rapidly losing consciousness. There were shouts of alarm from Daniel and Spencer, as though from somewhere far away, until the very last thing Sophia heard clearly at all before she passed out was the unfortunate scientist Frederick Eisenhart shouting out, "Oh no, what have I done? I must have said too much. The poor girl could not take it." And I'm going to go ahead. That's the end of part 1. So I'm going to hop right back on in another video with part 2. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.